One of the biggest lessons which I learned is that as leaders, we can never assume that everyone is experiencing the same reality as us. We need to create spaces for our team members to share their experiences and perceptions, understand their unique challenges, and support them in the best way possible. These are the words of today's guest, Drew Lawrence. And what he's getting at is that in the situation that he was faced, he had to, one, understand what his team members in a war zone was going through, and then at the same time understand the impacts that this was having on his team members back stateside, completely not in a war zone, but allow them to basically communicate what's going on in their mind and how they're dealing with the current situation and so on. Is so crucial for us as leaders to truly get an understanding of what all our people are going through, not just the ones who are directly affected by a crisis. In today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a treat. The guest today, Drew, good friend of mine, was a senior executive within a company whose workforce, 75% of their workforce was based or is based in Ukraine. And as you know, there's a war raging still to this day in that country. And as leaders, how do you deal with such a crisis, one that cripples 3/4 of your team? Well, that's what we're going to get into today. And you know what? Without further ado, let's get to it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the 3 domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Drew, brother, welcome to the show, man.
It's great to be here, Scott. Good to see you, buddy.
Yeah. All right. Let's go dive into this topic because this is, you got a bit of a crazy story, brother, to talk about.
I mean, it's I think it's a fun story. I learned a lot, that's for sure.
I bet you did learn a lot. So let's set the scene for the audience. Like a couple of years ago, minor thing happened. Russia just decides to invade Ukraine, and a couple changes occurred. Now, most people, like daily lives, most people are probably argued like their daily lives weren't necessarily truly affected, but like not yours. Yours was, despite being over here.
Yeah, I mean, and professionally, it was certainly not to the level of a lot of people that were and are still on the ground over there and living with it every day. But we went to bed on February 23rd, woke up 2021, woke up on February 24th, and 70% of our company found themselves in a war zone, in an active war zone with air raid sirens going off, going down to bomb shelters, not knowing if their home was going to be overrun within 72 hours, which was at the time a lot of what the talk track and what the speculation and media coverage at the time seemed to indicate was that Moscow's goal was to move on Kyiv and be there within 3-4 days.
Which actually was what they were trying to do. There was this whole convoy that stretched like literally, I think 20 or 50 kilometers long that got stuck, but that's another conversation for a different podcast. But let's run through that. Like, what was what was the sense in the company when you guys woke up the next day to realize that, like, hey, like 3/4 of our war zone, and we don't even know if they're alive right now?
Well, so that was the first thought was definitely, can we get a hold of them? Can we get what I call from my fire service days, an accountability check? Can we get a personal accountability report and know that everybody's okay? Call it a par. And this wasn't something that came out of the blue. This was something that you had seen the reports of troops massing on the border, of military exercises. So, as an executive team and as specific leaders within the organization who had people within the reporting hierarchy that were based in Ukraine, there was a lot of preparation that went into the event of, if this happened, what would we do? Basically, the plan you never want to have to use, but you always want to make sure you have as a leader in case something goes wrong. In this case, it went very wrong. And so what we did was we activated the plan. And I wish I could tell you that everything was smooth and 100%, but as you know, the best laid plans don't necessarily go to waste, but never go 100% according to how that plan was scripted out. And that was the experience that we had. So really, in the first 24 hours, it was crack open the plan, and where's step one? Set up the communication center, kind of set up a basic control at our headquarters office here in Denver. Have members of the executive team fly into town and arrange to have that 24-hour communications channel with our teammates in Ukraine, so that when they did have cell service, when they did have internet connectivity, we were able to get through and connect and work with them through those first critical 72 hours of just establishing, are you okay? Forget the work piece. Are you okay? Are you safe? Is your family safe? With obviously safe being a relative term in an active war zone.
So you guys set up what I would refer to as an ops center, an operations center. You guys set one of those up for your company. How did that even come to be in the first place? Because that's not something you hear often on Civvy Street. So that's interesting for me.
Yeah, I think there are a couple unique factors that just kind of came together to facilitate that. The first is, the company itself. It was only a year and a half, actually less than a year old as the new company. The company had been a three-way private equity merger situation, and so there was still a lot of everyone getting to know each other. Teams all across the globe, not just in Ukraine, but also the United States. As part of planning for what may be to come, we had explored where would we be able to stand up additional teams to ensure that our customers and clients didn't see a negative impact on their service within reason. And to that point, everyone was fantastic knowing and understanding the situation that our team was in, and people asked, and the concern and the genuine compassion and empathy was one of those bright lights that you know that they're still good in the world, because so many of the customers were concerned about our teammates who they worked with on a daily basis. But because we had this diverse, dispersed remote work environment, we knew that in a crisis type situation, you can't replicate face-to-face communications, being in the room and having, to your point, that ops center set up. And so the plan had always been that if negative things were to happen and Russia invades Ukraine, we'll stand up this operations center. We didn't stand it up in the first 24 hours because it was in the middle of the week, and we didn't want people in the air flying until we had a sense of what was happening. And once we were able to get that initial accountability heading into that first weekend, it was great. Everyone take time on the weekend, get in here, and then Monday morning, we're going to be operational 24/7, all in the same room, versus different standing open meetings and things like that with various communication channels. In terms of where did that come from, this is another one of those factors. You have this coincidence of a three-way merger that has a lot of team in Ukraine right as Russia launches an invasion. I was fortunate enough that in a past life I had the privilege of leading a crew of firefighters and was in the fire service for about 8.5 years. And through that training, as you know from your military training, an emergency scene or a mission has a very similar profile in terms of how you train, how you prepare, how you execute it. And so for me, it was a little bit of second nature, and going back to some old training that I had to think through, okay, what do we need to have? I was, at the time, fortunate to not be in a position where someone specifically within my reporting structure was impacted or on the ground in Ukraine. And that enabled me to play more of a liaison role across my teammates who did have teammates on the ground who they were trying to get in touch with, establish if they were safe, etc. And that enabled me to leverage, my past experiences and say, okay, let's not forget the HDMI cables and the extension cords, and let's make sure we've got food coming in. And hey, let's make sure we have a backup communications channel, and let me research different ways that we might be able to transact and pay our teammates there while other people are actually executing the things day to day and minute by minute that were happening.
That sounds pretty intense. And not something that I would think people would think that the average company would go and do for its people. Now, I'm interested to hear, what was the goal for the Ops Center that you guys had set up? Like, obviously, it was to reach out and to check in on your people and stuff. But like, outside of that, what was the goal for it? What were you guys trying to achieve?
The initial and primary objective was be there to support the team in whatever way we could. In some cases, this was helping to facilitate teammates in Germany driving to Poland to get to the Ukrainian border to drop off needed supplies. In some cases, this was, I don't have access to this account. Can you process my funds through this different account? This was right at the height of they're freezing banks and money's not transacting, but people were trying to get to the grocery store, trying to buy and stock up in the 48, 72, 96 hours after the initial invasion and missiles and bombs started falling. And so it was a matter of, first and foremost, what do you need? How can we help to make sure you stay safe? And the second part of that was we also had a duty to our clients and our customers who had mission critical tasks that they had put us responsible for their business. And we had to make sure we continued to deliver for them, while understanding we have teammates that are unavailable right now. This was not an expectation of you continue to work. It was, let's all be in the room, make sure our team is safe. And by all being together, we can coordinate who's going to cover for our teammates to ensure that our customers and clients still receive the service that they need to operate their business.
Got it. Yeah, definitely a ball or two in the air for sure, and a couple things to coordinate from time to time. It sounded like
it was.
Now,
I was just going to jump in and say, what I thought was what struck me in hindsight, and obviously in the moment, is, as you know from your experiences, you are relying on your training, your teammates, and you are doing what needs to be done to achieve the objective. In this case, get in touch with our team. Are they okay? Are we doing everything we can to help them? And are we able to continue delivering without negative impacts for our customers and clients? And you don't always in that moment reflect on the chaos or the balls in the air. You're just executing against what you need to get done. But afterwards, debriefing multiple times, because obviously the situation is still ongoing over there. But every time you go through that debrief and try to reflect and learn from it, one of the things that struck me every step of the way was just the empathy and compassion that existed on a human level for people caring about other people they'd never met, people that they maybe have never interacted with online in a Teams or Slack-based environment as teammates, and for, like I said, our customers who reached out proactively to check on the teammates of ours that they interfaced with on a regular basis. And part of what my accountability was, having the privilege of leading the sales organization, was to ensure that the sales team continued to do their job and continue to advance their deals and continue to close deals, knowing that that was revenue that was going to be needed to continue to support our team in Ukraine. And so everybody had a role in the company's situation on an individual level to make sure that they were there for their teammates. And in my team's case, that was a lot of them showing up and making sure that their sales deals and working with their clients was able to continue to progress, to continue to support our teammates in Ukraine.
Sounds like a bit of like a rallying cry, huh?
It was definitely a rallying cry, but at the same time, a massive, clearly war is a distraction. War is a horrible thing. But to your point earlier, not a lot of people have this experience. It's one that I wish I didn't have, because I wish I didn't have teammates that were stuck in a war zone ever. I wish there weren't people stuck in war zones, but the reality is that's a fact of life. And then the question is, so what are you going to do with that situation? And what was really impressive to me was to see how different members of the team stepped up in different ways outside of anything to do with work, just on a human level of wanting to support one another, and then bringing that mindset to their professional work environment and understanding that doing their job to the best of their ability is exactly what they needed to be doing to help support the team, and not allowing that to be a distraction, because it can be really easy in that situation to feel helpless. We're sitting in the comfort of our homes with steady connectivity and plenty of food and the ability to go outside and go to the restaurant. And you're on a Zoom call with a teammate, and all of a sudden they say, hey, I've got to go to the bomb shelter. Talk later. Click, and they disappear. And you're sitting there wondering, oh man, I hope they're okay. 10 minutes later, they hop back on the call from a hotspot in a bomb shelter. And you're looking at them and say, well, hold on, what are you doing? Are you okay? Like, don't be on this call. But work for our team in Ukraine gave them a sense of normalcy. For those that were able to and wanted to, they said it was, hey, this is the only part of my routine I have anymore. I can't go to the store. I can't take my kids to school. And so being able to at least have this interaction is me doing my part right now to support my team and support my countrymen and women as we're going through this crazy time.
That's a wild story. I just can't imagine being on a call and having someone say, I got to run because bombs are coming in, only to have them show back up 10 minutes later in some kind of bunker. Like, I've been in bunkers myself personally, and it's like the last thing I would be thinking about is dialing back in.
And it was inspiring, because I'll tell you one thing, it certainly had me out. Those were days that I wasn't griping about my job. The privilege I felt of being able to sit in this office and not worry about that, and frankly roll my eyes about maybe having to go to my next meeting sometimes. Meanwhile, I have teammates whose life is under threat, saying, no, I want to keep working. And that says something about the team and the culture and the leadership that I was privileged to work with and learn from throughout my entire time there, from our CEO to my teammates on the executive team and through our extended leadership team and managers, that really put the people first, knowing that by putting our people first, in war, outside of war, doing that as a general rule of thumb, you're going to end up with a strong team that is performing well. And we were fortunate that helped carry us through that time.
Yeah, those are some definitely crucial keywords there. Drew, I'd like to change gears just slightly, and I'd like to talk about more of the psychological plane now on your team members. Now, you said that you didn't have anyone who reported directly to you affected by this, i.e. living in Ukraine, but still, that's a lot of stress on everyone. How did you guys manage? How did you cope with taking care of your people who weren't on that side of the equation per se, but still at the same time recognizing that you did have people over there that were in harm's way?
Yeah, I think the one of the big things to keep in mind as leaders in that situation is that your team does not have the experiences or the responsibility or accountability that you do, that have resulted in you being in the position that you're in. And so it's really important as leaders to take off the potential blinders you have and try to look at the situation from the shoes of your individual contributor, your frontline worker, whoever that might be, and understand that their perception dramatically influences their reality. I hate the phrase perception is reality, but we can't deny the fact that it certainly dramatically influences your sense of reality. And so a key thing for all of us on the leadership side was to make sure that we created space to talk and check in and ask and invite our teammates to share their experiences. we had a number of team-wide meetings where employee, team-wide, company-wide, subgroups, just making sure you're creating that environment. Because again, we didn't have an office where everyone was gathering. The executive team was together with a few other teammates, but by and large, it was a fully remote organization. And so creating that space intentionally takes on new meaning when it's a Zoom room and a calendar invite, not people standing around in the kitchen talking. And so we wanted to make sure that we created those environments, public, private, anonymous, not anonymous, so that folks felt comfortable surfacing what was on their mind. I would start every meeting with my team with everyone checking in. How are you doing? I had a few teammates that were actually based out of Germany that had more extensive experience working in more personal relationships with some of those teammates in Ukraine. And they were impacted differently than folks on my team here in the US who had never interacted with one of the Ukrainian teammates directly, but saw them on company meetings, or they were on email threads or worked on projects together. And so not everyone's going to react similarly to that type of situation. And as leaders, it's important that we really adopt a servant leader's mindset and understand how it's impacting those individuals. Reacted very differently than members of the team that had never had that experience or hadn't been exposed to war or combat or air raid sirens. Those that had kids reacted differently than those that didn't, because they might, myself included, it was a little bit of, I couldn't imagine having my son and daughter in that environment. What would I do? And we had teammates with young kids in that environment. And so the biggest takeaway is create this space and make the time to have the conversation and take a genuine concern in the answer, and make sure that you're hearing and listening and putting that into action in terms of how you maybe then share your next update. There was one example that comes to mind where, as you know from our interactions, I'm a pretty direct individual. I try to be mindful with my words. However, in times of high stress or when I'm in execute mode, sometimes my tone and my word choice isn't always there, and I'm operating with best intent, but we just got to kind of go with it. One of my teammates, fortunately, called me on that and said, hey, when you said it that way, and I don't even remember what it was that I said, but the tone in which I said it was perceived as dismissive. And I certainly didn't mean it as dismissive, but I needed to know that that's how that person heard it, so that the next time I could ensure that they didn't take that perception away again. I asked a teammate of mine, hey, did you hear it this way? That individual said, no, not at all. I heard it this way, another way, which is exactly how I intended it. Well, guess what? That's because that person's a lot more similar to me than this other individual. And so the key thing as leaders in that time of crisis is to know that it's not one size fits all, because everyone responds to acute stress differently. And you can establish patterns and frameworks to help address it. But do not ever assume that person A is going to respond the same way as person B, F, S, or Z, because that will put you in a bad position.
Man, so many truth bombs in there. So many great nuggets. But I really liked how you guys set up different forms of communication for people to be able to come out and talk about that situation, express themselves, whether that be anonymously, maybe that is non-anonymously. However, I think that's crucial because not everyone communicates in the same way. Just as you said with your personal story about being perceived as being dismissive. By the way, I have that occasional problem as well, which I still work on to this day. Yep. Right?
The journey will never end for either one of us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just it is common in us A types, right? But the important thing is the crucial thing is to understand that people communicate in different ways, and we can't just use one form of communication, especially in a time of crisis, to ensure that the message is being passed. But as you clearly and eloquently highlighted, the ability for messages to be passed up as well, enable people.
That's a huge part that oftentimes gets lost or is not necessarily lost, but overlooked in a crisis situation. And I'm very fortunate that to leverage the time and training I had in the fire service to understand that sometimes the most important information I'm going to get is coming from the person that is Frontline's individual contributor, and making sure that I can hear them however they need to be heard. Sometimes in the fire service, that's on the radio, and you make sure no one else is talking. In a professional environment, that can be a face-to-face video call. That can be face-to-face in an office if you have that opportunity. But other people in, say, this type of high-stress situation that might drive a lot of emotion for folks may not feel comfortable showing that type of emotion to their manager or boss or peers for fear of judgment or whatever it might be. And no matter how strong of a culture you strive to create, a key point of and required element of any strong culture is ensuring that the team feels the ability to speak what's on their mind in a productive and effective way. And so for others, that's, I need to take this in a little bit and I'll process it in writing, and I'll send you a note, or I'll have a chat with you. Because if we get on a call and you hear my tone of voice, I'm going to get self-conscious that I'm emotional about this. And making sure that you're able to, as leaders and managers, understand the value that each voice has on your team, regardless of how that voice is heard, whether it be loudly, softly, immediately, a few minutes, hours, days later, in writing or not. There's value in all of it that informs how we can be better leaders and what we can do to better serve our teams.
So many amazing nuggets in there. Yeah, I don't even need to add to that. But what I would like to do is make another little slight change in course here. Obviously, still keeping with the theme of crisis and all this stuff. But you highlighted multiple times that you're leading a fully remote team. Now, a lot of leaders out there are struggling, and the best of times keep their teams motivated, keep them on point, keep the cohesion going. How do you even go about doing that when you got 3/4 of your workforce in a war zone, and you got an active crisis, you got an ops center stood up, you have all this different things going on that is obviously not part of the normal day-to-day, and so many leaders out there right now are just struggling with the normal day-to-day with remote teams.
Yeah, I think, I was talking to a buddy of mine about this the other day, and the question of in the office, hybrid, remote. I think it's safe to say remote's here to stay. You're seeing teams move more towards hybrid environments in some cases. And I do believe there are certain roles and functions where maybe that opportunity for remote is not as present, and in some cases can't be. We came to know each other through connections in the medical field, and that's one that certainly isn't an option to always be remote on. But for those of us that have that ability, it definitely came with a new set of challenges once COVID hit and created this new normal. I was one of those people that when COVID happened was like, okay, how many days do we get back in the office? I was the first one in, last one out. I want to high five everyone on my way in the morning when they walk in and see me standing there. And my ability to really feed off the energy of the team, I attribute to a huge part of my professional success over my career. And so when remote happened, and then it became clear it wasn't going away. And then it became clear, there's a lot of benefits to this. Every spotlight's going to cast a shadow. And so while there's a lot of benefits, what are the unintended consequences that come with that? Accountability, motivation, communication are three that come to mind. In a remote environment, present a new set of challenges than you had in an office. In an office, I look over and see you setting up your fantasy lineup for 3 hours on a Thursday morning, heading into a big football weekend. And I can say, hey, what's going on over there? But in a remote environment, you're operating in a complete blind trust. And that doesn't mean negative trust in any way, but there's not a trust but verify component, like looking over and just seeing somebody. And so part of driving that in that remote culture is to set the proper expectations with your team as a leader. I like to use an acronym called CAT: clear communication, mutual accountability, and maximum transparency. And in a remote culture, if you can communicate effectively with maximum transparency, which is not complete transparency, there's certain things that in a setting you can't share with certain people, and that's okay. But I'm a big believer that you should share as much as you can to create and foster trust. And by doing that, by communicating that clearly, and by being very clear on what the goals are for the individual and the team, and how each individual's contributions impact that team, then that gives you the environment to drive that motivation and that alignment, even in a remote setting.
Yeah, there's so many awesome and just so many amazing truth bombs in there, and I appreciate the acronym there, Cat. That's a definitely a good one, and I subscribe to all those ideologies. Now, communication is deemed to be the most crucial aspect during a crisis, right? So when I was preparing to go to Afghanistan and we're doing incident management training, i.e. taking over something that happens, whether that be a roadside bomb or getting in contact or what have you, it was always about clear communication, clear, calm communication, so that one, you can pass orders to your soldiers, but two, you can pass information upwards so that you can get the support that you need. Now, one of the things I hear often from leaders in talking about remote spaces, oh, there's always communication issues. There's communication issues. It's not the same as face to face. Blah 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 blah. All these problems, excuses, what have you. Now, so you guys were combined. You're one having the the difficulties of remote communications, but two, you're actively communicating through a crisis. So, what are some actionable things that leaders out there can employ for their remote teams to ensure that they're communicating effectively?
Well, I think I break that down into two different buckets. There's communicating effectively day to day, and then communicating effectively in the crisis, which certainly changes that a little bit. From a day-to-day standpoint, it's what's the common foundation of language between you and your team that everyone understands what that means. A great example of this is I would start team meetings and go around and do check-ins, and we'd use a red, yellow, green kind of stoplight methodology, pretty common in the mindfulness space and working in different check-ins and stand-ups. And in that process, everyone on the team knew that green meant I'm in a good spot, I'm well rested, I'm here, I'm present, I'm ready to go. What's going on? Let's go get it. Yellow, hey, I'm a little distracted. Red, I'm not feeling well. I'm super stressed out, kind of pegged. Everyone understood what that meant. And so when you have that shared language across time zones, across cultures, it's even more important to make sure that what you think is shared language is truly shared language. And as a leader, that is, hey, what does this mean to you? What do you think that means? Did you hear it this way? Nope. Okay. Let me make sure that I'm, as the leader, communicating in a way that what my intention is what you hear. Sometimes that's tonality. Other times that's exact phrasing. Other times that is, what are you putting in writing? And what is the way that is consistent across the spectrum of different communication channels, different timelines. For example, with folks spread around the world, not everyone could make every meeting. We didn't expect people to work in the middle of the night. And so you'd catch up by watching a recording of a meeting that you missed, which means you don't have the ability to real time participate in that conversation. So by having that shared vocabulary going into it and that shared understanding of the goals and that clear accountability for who is accountable and responsible for the different tasks of a project or whatever the activity might be, that helped to short circuit any disconnects or help to avoid any short circuits and disconnects in what is meant by that. In a crisis, you truncate it. There's a great acronym, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Silly, I don't want to call anybody stupid, so we'll go with keep it simple, silly. But the KISS acronym in a time of crisis is only give me the critical needed information right now. Because other things are going to back up and things are changing so quickly. And so we would simplify things as opposed to having a meeting and have everyone trying to get onto that meeting and communicate. How much can we do asynchronously? How much can we automate and generate automated reports so that we're not taking time asking the questions? We're able to look at a dashboard and get the answer. And so anything in times of crisis that you can do to streamline and simplify your communications process is essential. And some people might say, well, Drew, wouldn't you want to do that all the time? Why wouldn't you always want to have that simplified and streamlined comms? You do. However, you don't want to, in times that aren't high stress or crisis situations, you still want to keep them personable. You still want to keep it friendly and not familial per se in a professional setting, but because you're not all in the room, take that moment to say, hey, what's up? How are you? Oh, this is something that's happening, or this is how I'm feeling, or this really bothered me when I heard that so-and-so didn't check in today. Are they okay? And you want to make sure you create that time. If I'm on an emergency crisis center check-in call, we're not having niceties. It is go, no go, yes, red, yellow, green, done, next. And then you come back and say, all right, how's everybody doing? Everybody okay? I think that's the biggest difference between crisis comms and non-crisis comms is in crisis comms, you want to make sure you pare it down and simplify it to the essential key information and nothing else.
Yeah, I really like it because especially in times of crisis, time is such a commodity. Time is a huge commodity all the time. But but the reality is that in time of crisis, it's so crucial. But what I often talk about is like people talk about remote work and stuff like this. I'm like, the principles are principles. Open communications, just that the webcam and the computer screen is just the medium in which it gets it done. Like, is it exactly the same as face-to-face? No. But neither was the telephone, yet we're all comfortable with having phone calls. It's just the medium. It's just the tool.
Exactly.
And
the principles are timeless. And that's what makes them the principles that we know we can all lean on. To your point, you mentioned the phone call and no one think about this transition from phone to text. It's just an evolution that we've had to adopt to as leaders. And those that adopt to it, those that embrace it, those are the ones that continue to thrive and grow. And with any sort of change right now, everyone's talking about AI and LLM and generative AI. And is that going to make certain jobs not important, or is that going to create a dearth of jobs in certain segments? It's different, but similar to when the automobile was invented, when telephone was invented, when the internet was invented, when the internet hit mass consumption, when search engines became a thing, when Wikipedia became a thing for students writing term papers. And so instead of looking at that as, oh, it's so much harder to motivate my team in a remote setting or to hold my team accountable in the remote setting, I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to look in the mirror and say, what opportunities are we missing here? Because there is a lot of good that this does create. We just have to adjust our process to embrace what is going to be better for our people and our team and ultimately result in a better outcome for our business.
Bam. What a way to begin to wrap up this episode. Dropping bombs like that. Drew, man, we could talk forever, as we know, because we have
Certainly.
in the past talked forever. But before I do wrap up this show, I got a couple of last questions for you.
Certainly.
First being the question I asked all the guests here at Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, and that is, according to you, Drew Lawrence, what makes a great leader?
Putting their people first, Scott. It's that simple for me.
Kind of the theme of the show. And then finally, you're just kicking off your own little company, your own business. Why don't you feel free to give that a shameless plug and tell people where they can find you and reach out to you?
Certainly. Thanks, Scott. So I recently started up a company called Flashover Strategies, where I'm helping early and growth stage companies with their go-to-market and revenue strategy and tactics, both in a consulting and fractional role, depending on the needs, and helping those early companies find the right path, not just from a process, but also from a people and team standpoint, to create an environment to foster that explosive growth on the revenue side that every company's chasing. Easiest way to find me is actually going to be on LinkedIn. You can just find Drew Lawrence or Flashover Strategies. To your point of just kicking this thing off, I will have a website up here in the next couple of weeks. But I've been fortunate enough to already get to work with some clients and didn't want to put the cart before the horse. So got after it with those, and we'll be getting my website up shortly. But in the meantime, LinkedIn is the best way to find me.
And for you listeners, these as always, the links are in the show notes, so check it out. Drew, my friend, again, thanks for taking time to talk to us about this just ever incredible story about leading through a crisis when you got 3/4 of your company in an active war zone. Still blows my mind.
Well, Scott, I appreciate your time and your friendship as always, and looking forward to our next conversation. Thanks again.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that, help me, help a friend, win-win all around, and hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.